I have mentioned before that the Nintendo 64 was not the best console for role-playing games, as they focused them on their handheld devices. Sega, on the other hand, were scrambling to stay relevant during the early 2000s and only released a few localized JRPGs with the Sega Saturn and the Sega Dreamcast. Without the widespread awareness of the internet to advertise all sorts of video games, gaming magazines that I remember would only mention the best ones from Sega in passing. One Sega exclusive franchise in particular that was overshadowed by those that came before and after it was Evolution for the Sega Dreamcast. In making this video game review, I took out my Sega Dreamcast and played both Evolution games back to back. Evolution 1, The World's Secret Device, and Evolution 2, Far Off Promise. Now, despite the little difference between the two games, both run fundamentally the same. Due to that fact, I will be showcasing the things that make them similar and the things that make the other game so unique. Let's load them up, then press start. Evolution 1 and Evolution 2 introduced us to a young boy adventurer named Mag, along with his childhood girl companion named Linear. Their whole purpose is to explore different ruins and return with all of the treasures that they can find. Along the way, they will also discover pieces of themselves as they travel with different people and overcome certain obstacles. The first game was released in the US on December 1999, and the sequel was released on June 2000, developed by Studio Sting and published by Ubisoft. In the first game, we meet Mag, the heir to the richest broke family of their hometown. Along with him is the soft-spoken Linear, Gray, the faithful butler, Chain, his rival, and Pepper, the sexy mercenary. They all come back in the second game with the addition of Carcano, the bandit boss, who is only playable during the later parts of the second game. Mag, Chains, Pepper, and Carcano use weapons called Cyframes. With the necessary items, you can add offense, defense, and support skills into them. Linear uses all sorts of skillets and serves as the primary healer of the group, while Gray uses all sorts of guns and has the skill to alter Mag's fighting ability. Both Evolution titles are designed to be a roguelike dungeon-crawling role-playing game with a visible on-screen map. The on-screen map will only be fully visible if a floor was successfully explored. The monotonous maze-like design of each floor will consume most of the player's time. In the first game, you can choose to complete 1 out of 6 dungeons. The game will direct the player to the next dungeon and then the next until all 6 dungeons are completed. For the second game, all dungeons are not readily available. The game's main storyline will direct you on which dungeons to go. For both games, each dungeon has at least 10 floors. All floors of a particular dungeon look virtually similar. In a particular dungeon, all floors are randomly generated, along with the items and traps. If the player chooses to leave the dungeon then back again, the overall layout of each floor will not be the same as before. Both games encourage the player to search and scour every inch of the dungeon for equipment, consumables, and appraisal items. Some items can help reveal certain aspects of a dungeon floor, but they are scarce and rarely obtained. Checkpoints are available in certain floors of a dungeon if it is necessary to retreat. Save points are usually in the rooms right before the boss battles. There is a quick save function on both games, but this feature is used mainly for players who need a short break from the monotonous experience of dungeon crawling, only to come back for more a few minutes later. In both games, enemies are visible and can be avoided. The battles are turn-based, with character avatars on the right side of the screen showing which characters will be acting first. The enemies will follow you once you are spotted. Most floors have narrow pathways that it can be tricky to avoid them. The characters have on-screen HP and FP numbers. FP represents the capability of the character to pull off a certain skill or magic. After the battle, some EXP, FP, HP, Money and TP are awarded. TP are technical points given to each on-screen character so that new skills or magic can be learned. Learning new skills and magic require a lot of TP. Grinding for more experience points to gain more HP, FP, and TP is absolutely necessary. In the first game, the characters can only attack, use skills, use items, move to the front or back of the field, and defend. The second game adds escape and talent. Talent, in this case, is a unique trait of a certain character that can be used without FP, but only available during certain points of the game and how often they are used. The first game will allow you to use healing skills and items during battle. Outside of combat, only healing items can be used. In the second game, however, it allows you the use of both healing practices during and out of battles. In the first game, you are allowed to carry only 30 items, while the second game can go as high as 40. Each individual item takes over one item slot, meaning if you got 3 similar healing items, 3 item slots will be taken over. The second game allows for 2 or 3 items to be combined, taking only 1 item slot, but only a few items share this feature. If the inventory gets full, the player is allowed to deposit the extra items into a given storage space that can hold around 100 items. This feature is in both games. You will not get any rewards for hoarding all sorts of stuff, so it is advisable to keep whatever it is you think would be valuable later on. Consumable items that remedy status effects are more frequent than the other items that really matter. With the exception of poison, all other status effects can be nullified after battle or just walking it off until the effects are gone. Both games are products of its time. Everything was 3D rendered like any other CD-based 5th generation console. With a good and functioning Dreamcast console, the loading times would not take more than 5 seconds in between scenes. For both games, the player is only limited to stay on one specific town. When it is time to go to a chosen dungeon, the game will bring you straight to the entrance of it without the transition of a world map where you can travel from point A to point B. There's none of that. There are some design improvements in the second game and adding a third-person camera angle, but these, however, do not really amp up the playability. The soundtracks used for both games suit well enough to match the mood of every scene and every dungeon. Voice acting was done in Japanese, but the voices are at times being overpowered by the music, unless the option settings are changed to adjust the volume of either game. In the first game, Prince Eugene and his army are tasked to find an ancient artifact called Evolutia, which led him to Mag. In the second game, it focuses more on a mysterious boy named Yurka who wants to recreate the world, but he wants Linear to be on his side. It doesn't really matter that much if you play Evolution 2 first. To be honest, the second game does not really reference the events of Evolution 1 that much, except maybe for that one scene after the final boss fight of the first game. If anything, it just makes you curious on what was that all about. With both games being told of their basic premise, one can realize that both plots are too short and simplistic. Both games will introduce an exposition, direct you to the next dungeon, have another exposition, and then back to exploring yet again. Rinse and repeat. The only side questing that comes to mind would be going back and forth each dungeon to gather more rare items to be used, appraised, or sold for cash. The constant exploration got really old and boring for me, especially avoiding battles every time just to find items of questionable worth. Speaking of items, the fact that you can only carry 30 to 40 items is just asinine for a role-playing game. Although realistically, one should be very wise to carry only the basic necessities when exploring, since it is very counterproductive to carry a bunch of stuff anyway. So maybe the developers went for that idea. A player with a strict dedication and lots of patience and time can finish both games at least a week. I would give both games a score of 6 out of 10. And there you have it, guys. That was my review of Evolution 1 and Evolution 2 for the Sega Dreamcast. Just jot down in the comments your thoughts about these games. If you happen to like this video, give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. This is Jho-RPG. Thank you for watching. Bye-bye.